Because of the high variance nature of racing and the complex fantasy point distributions of each driver, you need simulations to beat NASCAR DFS in 2022. SaberSim combines the powerful data from our NASCAR sims with an optimizer that was designed to build lineups with upside, giving you the edge you need to crush NASCAR DFS this season. SaberSim does not just provide average projections. We simulate full races thousands of times, writing the different scripts for how the race could possibly play out, giving you the full and diverse ranges of outcomes for each driver. And when we build your lineups with SaberSim, we automatically pull in this powerful data, which means you'll get lineups that fit certain race optimals and have winning upside without having to set a single group or rule to build those kinds of lineups. Let's dive in and talk about how to use SaberSim to build winning NASCAR DFS lineups. I always recommend when you sit down to first start building your lineups for a race to start with what we call a test build. A test build is going to be a build that you do without adjusting any projections, exposures, ownership, or other settings to just familiarize yourself and figure out how the slate is looking. To do that, just go ahead and click the Build Lineups button here. Set your settings to the contest that you're playing. In this case, I'll just build 20 lineups and click Start New Build. The main advantages of running a test build are that, first of all, in NASCAR, the average projections are not very useful. So just studying average projections or point per dollar value on step one doesn't always give you a really good idea of what the actual best plays on the slate are. Second, a test build is going to let you target your research. You don't necessarily need to sit down and research every single driver racing in the race. One thing I like to do is figure out what are the highest exposed drivers that are coming up? How am I navigating the chalkiest drivers? Which drivers with the highest projected ownership am I over or under the field on? And what are my overall biggest leverage stands on the slate? What is the biggest difference between my exposure and the projected ownership for drivers in the field? Once you've familiarized yourself with the slate with a test build, you can go back to step one, and this is where you can make adjustments to projections or ownership or set min or max exposures before you start your build process. I like to use my test build as kind of a guiding line for which drivers I want to spend a little bit more time researching on. And I think some of the highest value opportunities for research are, first, looking to see how drivers did in their practices and qualifiers, and also looking at the driver fit and their track history racing at this particular track. When you want to make an adjustment to a driver, you don't need to have a very heavy hand. I like to make 10% bumps in either direction if I want to either get more exposure or fade a particular driver. If, for example, I felt like that was a bit too much exposure to Eric Almirola for me in my test build, I can take down his projection here by about 10%, and I'll get less of him in the next build. If I thought I wanted a little bit more exposure to a guy like Kurt Busch, I can bump his projection up again by about 10%, and I'll get more exposure in my ensuing build here. You don't need to dial this in perfectly because we're going to get an opportunity to fine-tune our lineups and our exposures here on step 3. But before that, let's first pull up the build settings again and take a little bit of a closer look here. The build settings and the sliders for all different contest types in NASCAR are going to be set by default at 0-10. That means 0 ownership fade and 10 sim variance. And what this means is every single lineup we build is going to be the optimal for a single race simulation. This means these lineups are going to be constructed in a way that fits a way that the race could play out. And you don't need to worry about setting any particular groups or rules to build winning lineup constructions here. I recommend mostly leaving this alone. If you want to bump up ownership fade a bit to take into account ownership a little bit more, I think that's fine. But the single biggest edge in NASCAR DFS in 2022 is through your lineup construction. And these sliders are going to be giving you well-constructed lineups that have a chance to be optimal or the winning lineup for a particular slate. Once you're ready to build, you can go ahead and just again click Start New Build. And it's worth noting here that instead of just building the 20 lineups that I'm planning on playing here, I'm building 500 viable lineups, 500 different optimal lineups for different simulations of this race. And that's going to allow me to make dynamic adjustments to my exposures here in step 3. Step 3 is mostly about fine-tuning or quality control. If you are going to go to step 3 and make significant changes to your pool here, we recommend going back to step 1 and either adjusting projections or removing particular drivers from your pool. I think one of the highest value things you can do in step 3 is adjusting your exposures to manage your risk. NASCAR is a very high variance game. Any driver has the potential to wreck, especially on some of these super speedway races. And I highly recommend considering adjusting your maximum exposure to some of your highest exposed drivers down, at least to match or meet the field, which is the projected ownership. For example, we can take Austin Dillon and knock his maximum exposure down to about 60%, which is going to sort through our pool of 500 lineups, finding the best 20 where Austin Dillon is rostered in no more than 60% of them. I will typically pull down the maximum exposure of a few of my highest exposed drivers just to manage my risk and diversify my lineups a little bit more. If there's a lower owned driver that you'd like to get a little bit more exposure to that isn't popping up in your exposures here, you can also set a minimum exposure. We could say, for example, give me 20% Ryan Blaney, and we'll make sure that of our pool of 20, we have at least 20%, in this case, 25% Ryan Blaney lineups. The thing that you have to remember here is that because all of these lineups have already been optimized for a single race simulation, we don't really have to worry about the individual lineup construction. The overall drivers that are showing up in each individual lineup are going to match the kind of lineup construction you need to be successful in that particular race. In this case, these are lineups for the Daytona 500, and you see that we're getting a lot of lineups that stack the back and rely on a lot of place differential type drivers because that's what this particular race requires to be successful. In races where a dominator is going to have the opportunity to lead the race for a long time, racking up a ton of fastest laps, laps led, and have a lot of potential to win the race, you'll see lineups that naturally incorporate more of those types of drivers showing up in your lineups. Once you're ready with your lineups and ready to enter them into the contest, we'll just go ahead and click the Save button here to save our lineups, and then we'll use the entry editor to get our lineups into our contest. To get to the entry editor, just click the Entries tab in the main navigation. You can click the Download Template file from DraftKings, which will automatically go to DraftKings and download your entries file for that particular slate, and then just drag and drop your entries file in, which will load your entries for that particular slate. From here, we'll just click the Fill Contest with Lineups button, select the set of lineups that we just built for this particular contest, click Apply to fill our lineups in, and then once we're ready, click Download All Entries, download and open DraftKings, which will download a new entries file and take you to the right page on DK to upload your file. I hope this was a helpful introduction on how to build winning NASCAR DFS lineups using SaberSim with the power of simulations, but you don't have to take my word for it. We have a completely free, no strings attached 7-day trial on our site, SaberSim.com, so you can try it, sign up, and build winning NASCAR lineups for yourself. If you have any other questions about how to use SaberSim for NASCAR or any other sports, as always, feel free to reach out to us at support@SaberSim.com. Thanks and good luck.